Welcome to the Labyrinth. I'm your host Pratham Padav. My guest today is Jayant Bhandari. He has been on this podcast numerous times before, and I always have an insightful conversation with him. He is an investor, entrepreneur, writer, and speaker. He has traveled to more than 100 countries, and he is currently joining us from China. And as always, if you find this podcast useful, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Jayant, welcome back to the Labyrinth. How are you?
I'm very well, Pratham, and thanks for having me again.
So I just want to start by asking, what are your thoughts on Trump's presidency? He's about to complete his first month.
I absolutely love it. I think he has been very decisive. He's moving forward very strongly. He's dealing with the issues he promised he would. So I'm very pleased with what he's doing. He was my candidate of choice anyway, and I think he's doing a much better job than I thought he would do. So I'm very pleased with his performance.
What are your thoughts on his anti-immigration reform? Has he been delivering on that promise so far?
He is, but this is not an easy problem to solve. In fact, I would say this is an impossible problem to solve. Just let's do some basic math. There are about 30 million illegal immigrants in the US. 30 million. 1% of 30 million is 300,000 people. So if he gets rid of 1,000 people, 300 people every day, which is approximately what he's doing right now, he cannot get rid of more than 1% of the illegal immigrants over the next 4 5 years. So this is almost an impossible job. He has to pick up his speed quite a bit. But unfortunately, he will soon start facing roadblocks because the courts will start hampering his work, the opposition will start hampering his work, and in fact, even the Republican Party will start hampering his work within the next 2 years. So this is an impossible job to achieve, but he has certainly slowed down the degradation of the US, and that is by itself a huge achievement.
And what are your thoughts on his stance on H-1B visa and ending of the birthright citizenship?
Well, not many countries in the planet allow birthright citizenship. In fact, I know of no other country that allows it except for the US. And I can fully understand why he wants to end that. Whether he will be able to implement that is another story because the courts will come in and they might stop him from implementing the birthright citizenship end. Um, Again, with H1B, the problem is that corporations want cheap labor. Corporations will give money, they provide support to the Republican Party, and they want cheap labor. So ending H1B is not as easy as many people in the right wing might think it could be. Again, I'm still very happy that he's slowing down the process. He's focusing more on bringing in the top talent rather than the average guy to work in 7-Elevens. As you know, 7-Elevens are run by Indians, a lot of motels are run by Indians, and a lot of these people come on H1Bs. Now, H1Bs are supposed to be for very smart, very skilled, very educated people. But all kinds of people are entering the US with H1B visas. The lowest salary that H1B people have is about 60,000 US dollar uh, per person, which is significantly lower than the average GDP per capita of the US, about 30%, about 25% lower than average GDP per capita. So, really, uh, H1B salary must, the minimum H1B salary must increase substantially as well.
Okay. Uh, it's interesting that you brought up how corporations want cheap labor. Don't you think this is where libertarians sometimes get it wrong? They don't understand how to preserve society. They're obsessed with free market and free market. They don't understand that being an absolutist when it comes to free market can cause degradation of societies.
Well, libertarianism for me is a philosophy. So I, as a libertarian, would want people to have full freedom of movement, full freedom of, in many ways. I want them to be able to prostitute themselves. I want them to be able to consume drugs. But when the rubber hits the road, you have to be more realistic about running the society. The institution and the legal framework has to take into account the implications of some of the liberty oriented thinking. So for example, despite that I'm perfectly fine with people doing what they want to do with their bodies, but I can also understand that they should have restrictions on drug usage or on prostitution, for example. um, so uh, and similarly, you certainly need restriction on immigration because you don't want to dilute the culture of your society.
What do you think happened to Vivek Ramaswamy? Do you think he was snubbed?
Um, I quite like Vivek. I think he's a very intelligent guy. He's very good with his thinking, and his spoken language is extremely good. He's a very clear thinker. But he was also correct about the degradation of the culture that has been happening in the Western society. The mistake he made was that he juxtaposed American culture with the Indian culture. Now, even in the worst case scenario, America is a million times better than India. So when you try to compare India with America and want to make India look better in comparison, you sound like a very simplistic person who hasn't really understood what India stands for. And clearly, a lot of people in the US have become tired of Indians. And they have a better understanding of what Indians mean to the Western society because Indians refuse to assimilate in the West. So I think Vivek was a sort of last straw on the camel's back. He created this an emergence of unhappiness with Indians in the American society, and in a way, it was quite justified.
Why do you think Indians refuse to assimilate? Wouldn't it be advantageous for them to assimilate in the West?
The reality is, Pratham, that apart from people of the Western society, apart from Europeans, other people struggle to assimilate in the West. And similarly, Western people would struggle to assimilate in East Asian societies, or Western people will struggle to assimilate in the Indian society. Um, this is because we have different instincts. We are culturally attuned differently. We look for different things. And Indians prefer the Indian music, they prefer the Indian noise, they actually quite enjoy the chaos that exists in the country. Now, that chaos and noise and the smells that exist in India exist for a reason. They exist because Indians prefer it that way. So Indians go to the West not to change their culture, they go to the West for money. And all they care about when they are in the West is to earn money. They do not really care to assimilate. But at the same time, what has happened over the last couple of decades is that the Western society has brought in so many people from the third world that they don't even need to, they are not even forced to assimilate. There are so many people now that every nationality, immigrant nationality, can have their own ghettos. So they actually not only don't assimilate, a sort of cultural inbreeding happens these days. So yes, they don't refuse to assimilate. There's no pressure for them to assimilate, and they become worse than the people of the homeland that they left behind.
Okay, okay. What is your opinion on Trump's recent comments on taking over Gaza? Do you think the US is repeating the same mistake that they've done before?
Well, I don't even know where that statement came from. I thought that was absolutely crazy. What gives the US an authority to take over a part of another country without the approval of the local people? So I thought that was absolutely crazy. It came out of nowhere. I don't even think he had really consulted that thought with the rulers of Israel either. So I don't know where it came from. It was a shocking statement coming from a world leader. Yeah, that's where I stand. I don't fully understand it, but it was shocking.
Do you think that maybe Israel has too much influence on American politics with IPAC and other organizations funding a lot of their campaigns?
Well, maybe they have a lot of influence, but so do other people as well. For example, the Indian lobby has a huge influence on American politicians. Indian lobbies, the both Sikh lobbies and Hindu lobbies, have a huge influence on Canadian politics. In fact, now the swing vote in Canada is decided by Sikh Indians and Hindu Indians, that every party has to pander to Indians in Canada as well. So is the case increasingly in the UK, with the Muslims deciding which side, who wins the government, who wins the elections. So this is a natural outcome of a multicultural society, and that is why no human society should be a multicultural society. No human society should be a multi-ethnic society either.
Okay, okay. So, should societies move in the direction of being ethnically more homogeneous?
Absolutely, Pratham. I prefer the East Asian way of keeping societies homogeneous, mono-ethnic, and that is the case with Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, Singapore. They prefer to keep themselves ethnically homogeneous to the extent possible. Japan, Korea, and China are virtually 99 to 99.5% or 99.8% made up of people of one kind. Uh, and that means that the policies are acceptable to virtually everyone, and there is a better law and order situation. There is harmony in these societies. So yes, a society should stay uh, homogeneous to the extent possible. But for a country like India and for Western societies, it is far too late. How do you undo the damage you have already done? Look at America. Close to 50% of Americans are now from people of the third world. They vote differently, their mind works differently, their cultures are different. And once you have given them your passports, how are you going to undo the fact that you have made yourself multicultural?
Then, why do you think white people have become so obsessed with this suicidal level of empathy?
Yeah, Pratham, I don't really fully understand it. I think a lot about it, and I wonder why East Asians did not make that mistake, but the Western society did. And I often come down to the fact that America was perhaps the first Western country that had a major chunk of its population, a significant presence of Afro people of African origin in the society. And that meant that when America was running the world after the Second World War, they wanted to forget about racial differences, the differences between people, and they wanted to implement that across the world. They wanted to do that because they wanted to, because America was existed in that multi-ethnic situation 100 years back. So I think that led one thing led to another, in which Americans wanted to completely ignore the concept of race and IQ and multiculturalism. And by not addressing that properly, they have kept on accumulating the problems of the third world inside the Western society.
What are your thoughts on what's happening in Britain right now with the increasing cases of Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs and their mass rape of young white girls?
Yes, and again, as I said earlier, that British politics, Muslims have a huge say. There's a big chunk of population that is Muslim, and what happens, Pratham, is that because the left and the right wing parties both get close to 50% of votes of the local populations, a 2 or 3% foreigners of different culture make all the difference because they become the swing vote. So a 2 or 3% population of different kind can decide a complete difference in governance of a nation, and that is why you should actually stay more than 99 or more than 99.5% homogeneous. United Kingdom has a lot of Muslims of Pakistani origin, and from what I understand, politicians did not want to make Muslims unhappy by investigating the gang rapes and grooming gangs of the United Kingdom. Now, it is very easy to pinpoint that only on Muslim Pakistani Muslims. The problem is that the United Kingdom got some of the worst people of Pakistan in the country as immigrants, whereas they got a better chunk of Indians from India, which means that the situation in the UK does not mean that Indians are not prone to doing something very similar. And as you look inside India, you realize that grooming gangs and rape gangs are no less common in India as they are in Pakistan. So I am ambivalent about the religion. I think Indians, which means Indians, Indian Pakistanis, Indian Bangladeshis, who I call Indians, all of them Indians. They are necessarily amoral, irrational people, and they want to acquire resources. And if they can get away with a crime, they do try to do it to get away with it.
How should Europe then deal with the asylum seekers and refugees who are becoming increasingly violent?
Well, I mean, they should have done something much earlier. It is political correctness of the Western society that they did not want to think about this earlier. And in fact, I must say that despite the vociferous ultra right wing that has emerged in the West, most Western people don't want to challenge their political correctness. Political correctness is a very important part of culture of the Western society, and they don't want to recognize that people of the third world, irrespective of their religion or race, actually create a lot of problems in the Western society. Um, my view is that, firstly, all the Western societies should completely stop giving away their passports to other people with ease that they have always given their passports. Canada gives away its passport after 3 years of residence in Canada. And the same is the case in Australia and New Zealand. So, firstly, they should avoid giving their passports to new people. And they should actually have a complete moratorium on giving away their passports. Secondly, they should stop accepting refugees. There's no reason for them to accept refugees. Look at China, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong. No refugee comes to their countries because they refuse to accept refugees. I was told that Japan accepted about 100 refugees last year. And I guarantee you, Pratham, that none of them will get Japanese citizenship ever. Even if they stay on for 3 generations, they will not get citizenship. So I think the Western society should stop bringing in more immigrants. They should completely stop giving away their passports. And I think a bit of a racial policy in which they focus more on maintaining homogeneity would be an advantage. But the problem again, Pratham, is that it is far too late for the Western society because Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US are on their way to become more than 50% people of the third world. So there's no way out for those countries. They have, in my view, committed suicide. Trump is slowing a few things down, but he can only delay the degradation. He cannot end the degradation of the Western society.
Is there also an economic reason to bring all these people in because whites have had a very low fertility rate for the past few decades?
Well, fertility rate is very low in China and Japan and Korea as well. But these people refuse to bring in immigrants, and a lot of slack has been taken over by robots in these countries. When I was in Gwangju 2 months back, my room service was done by a robot. So robots can take over a lot of slack there. But also, even if you have low fertility, you want to deal with that problem by increasing the fertility. By bringing in immigrants, you at best you kick the can down the road. You don't destroy the problem. So you have to deal with the problem, and the best way to deal with the problem is not to ignore the problem by bringing in immigrants. From what I see, Japan, Korea, and China are doing perfectly fine. And the population of the Japan is decreasing. I go to villages in Japan which are emptying out. But what do you prefer? You want to keep
Yeah.
your society healthy, or you want to bring in third world people who will not assimilate, who will create problems, and who will not even participate in your social structure? So, how does it benefit you by bringing in people from the third world?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Uh, let's look at what's happening in India right now. Recently, we had this Maha Kumbh Mela, and the government is claiming that there were more than 450 million. They're throwing out big numbers. Uh, what do you think about this spectacle?
Well, God, I have been to Pratham two Kumbh Melas myself in the past, and I was able to take a train to go to Kumbh Melas. In I think one was in Haridwar and the other one was in Varanasi. Um, uh, and those were done the normal way, but now the Kumbh Mela has become a politicized event in which the government wants to bring in millions and millions of people when the government cannot even provide the infrastructure and logistics for people to go to Kumbh Mela. This is absolutely outrageous, in which the government wants all the celebrities to go to Kumbh Mela, and they have marked out a huge chunk of the area for VVIPs. And that leads to a lot of chaos for the general public, because the general public in India is treated like cockroaches, literally like cockroaches. VVIPs are the only people who matter in that country. So you have millions of people trying to take a bath in that river on one hand, and a few scores of VVIPs taking over a nicer and bigger chunk of the river for their personal purposes. I think this VVIP, VIP culture is a huge problem for the country, but also underpinning this over advertisement of Ram Temple and Kumbh Mela has everything to do with creating a hatred for minorities, particularly Muslims, because the BJP gets its votes from creating dislike for minorities. Now, I'm not blaming just Hindus or the BJP for doing this, because in Pakistan and Bangladesh, exactly the opposite happened, where Muslims created dislike for Hindus. And in fact, they are two different sides of the same coin. The Muslims and Hindus are two different sides of the same coin. The primary thing about these people is that they are Indians. Whether they are Pakistani Indians or Bangladeshis, they are Indians, and they have similar cultures.
Also, I'm sure you must have seen all these videos which you have shared on Twitter post Kumbh Mela, mostly in Patna railway station, where people were flooding the trains, people were assaulting people getting on the trains, they were hitting people. What did you think about that?
Well, fundamentally, Indians are irrational, amoral people, and they don't fight for their rights. They should have fought for their rights and they should have fought to make sure that instead of government using demagoguery to run the country, they should be using providing proper facilities to the public, which the government did not do. So I think the big problem comes from the fact that Indians are not aware of their rights. They don't fight for their rights. All they care about is meeting their tribal instincts and getting some freebies from the government. The government uh, has been promoting all these Ram Temple and Kumbh Mela without actually providing logistics to people. It is more expensive for people to get to Kumbh Mela site today than it is for them to get to Singapore or Thailand. That's how expensive the plane tickets have become. And people really accept being treated like cockroaches. And that is my biggest problem with Indians. They accept degraded existence instead of fight for a fight for better governance.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think Hindu society has become too superstitious. There was open defecations in Kumbh Mela, and people are doing all sorts of irrational things. Do you think Hindus, especially young Hindus, should consider leaving the religion?
It has nothing to, well, religion is downstream to culture, and it does not matter whether you are a Hindu or whether you are a Muslim. The people of Indian subcontinent are irrational, and religions are just downstream to the culture of the society. Indians are fundamentally irrational, amoral people, and the British created institutions. They imposed the institutions on India, and those institutions have continued to degrade. There was class associated with educated people in the country earlier, and that classiness has continued to dissipate with time. So I think the key problem is that without Western leadership, India will continue to fall apart, continue to degrade. Leaving the religion is not the solution. The solution is to become moral and rational, and what happens as the outcome is all that matters to me. The problem is that I might tell you, Pratham, that hey, remove Islam from the Middle East. The problem is that yes, Islam might be creating fanaticism in the Middle East, but is removing Islam going to solve the problem, or it will worsen the problem? And my guess is that removing religions from these people will actually worsen the problem. And my guess is that because people have become less religious in terms of believing in God in India, they have become more violent, more irrational, more crude and rude with time, because they don't have the fear of religion in them anymore. So instead of getting religion, I would rather work on the culture and rather work on making these people rational and moral.
Okay. A lot of the videos and the examples that you share on Twitter are mostly from the states of UP, Bihar, and other parts of North India. Now, I'm not saying that South India is way better than North India. Both South and North are absolute shitholes compared to first world, second world countries. But since South India is objectively slightly cleaner than North India, slightly less populated, do you think the South would benefit from seceding?
India is going to fall apart anyway, Pratham. I think India should create a constitutional provision for different regions to go their own way. And I think Kashmir, incorporation of Kashmir into India was against the contract that India had with the king of Jammu and Kashmir. Supreme Court should never have allowed uh, incorporation of Jammu and Kashmir into to India. What they did was that they ignored the agreement that was in Article 370 that India had with Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, my view is that India should create a constitutional provision where people of different places can just leave the country voluntarily and peacefully. But India does not have that constitutional provision. In fact, anyone asking for secession is immediately branded as anti national. I think people of Punjab should have the right to go their own way. People of northeastern provinces should have the right to go their own way. People of Kashmir should have the right to go their own way. And similarly, people of the southern part of India should have the right to go their own way. But unfortunately, Pratham, the way the Indian mind thinks, and that includes people of South India, they will never want to have that constitutional provision. They are like lobsters who want to leave themselves, but they don't want to let other people leave. Uh, and that means that the end result is that no one can leave. And unfortunately, a voluntary, peaceful secession of different regions isn't going to happen. It will happen because India will eventually become so brittle that it will fall apart.
Uh, in your country, in Canada, Trudeau has recently decided to resign. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm ambivalent about it. In fact, I'm unhappy about it. Trudeau was a horrible prime minister. Under his control, Canadian economy is stagnated. About 12 or 13 years back, Canadian economy on per capita basis was similar to that of the American economy. Today, American GDP per capita is about 60% higher than that of Canadian GDP per capita. So there's a huge differential has developed between Canada and the US over the last 10, 12 years. Um, Unfortunately, the problem is that while Trudeau was a horrible prime minister, my suspicion is that what comes later will be worse than Trudeau. I'm happy, but at the same time, not satisfied because we might have a worse person becoming the prime minister of Canada. Uh, so, um, so that is the situation with the country. Even if the prime ministership goes to the Conservative Party, which it will go eventually later this year when when elections happen, it will not be a significant improvement on how Canada is structured. The problem, Pratham, is comes back to the same thing that Canada has brought in massive number of immigrants. I think Canada has brought in more immigrants on per capita basis than any other country on the planet. So, uh, so today, close to 50%, 45 to 50% of Canadian population is made up of first and second generation immigrants. Canada is just is like a hotel today, where you just come in, take their passports, and leave. And that's what people are doing. They come here for money. They don't want to assimilate. Ghettos of different people have appeared all over the country. Different kind of ghettos of Somalians and Eritreans and Indians have appeared in the country. So, and these people, because they live in ghettos, they vote for people of their own kinds. So, unfortunately, Canada is on a self-destructive path.
Okay, okay. How do you think India will look post Modi's rule?
It will be the same situation with India. Modi is, in my view, a horrible prime minister. In my view, he's not a very intelligent person. I think he has this goonish uh, uh, personality. But when I look at the second layer of leadership in the country, and that includes across the parties, I don't see anyone uh, uh, better than him. I think when Modi goes, the next prime minister will make me nostalgic for Modi, despite the fact that I dislike Modi completely.
Okay, okay. So
And
you're
that
in.
is the nature of democracy, Pratham. That is the nature of democracy. That's been happening in the UK. That's been happening in Canada. That's been happening in India. That happened in Pakistan. So democracy, despite the rhetoric about it, is suicidal for every society because democracy is fundamentally anti-meritocratic. It gives the right to decide on rulership to people who are the lowest 51% of your population.
Okay, so you're in China right now. Would you say that is the reason why China is doing well?
Well, China, Japan, and Korea, irrespective of their governance, are actually meritocratic countries. China is a very meritocratic system. They also have a lot of democracy, Pratham. This is not advertised properly, but at the local level, there's a lot of democracy in China. People elect local people, and different regions have freedom from the federal government. Local governments often ignore the requirements that come from the federal government.
So to conclude, I just want to ask, what can India learn from China and from East Asia to become more like it? Not exactly like it, because that's not possible, but at least a an inferior version of East Asia.
Well, it is not possible, Pratham, because Indians are fundamentally irrational and amoral people. And somehow India has to have that cultural renaissance that started with Bengal Renaissance about 150 years back. So it's a very long process, and India has to open up. But more importantly, it has to somehow find good leadership. But unfortunately, the system of India is such that it is absolutely impossible for good people to rise to positions of power in the country. So I'm extremely pessimistic about the country. But if Indians really want to start somewhere, they have to start becoming rational and moral and somehow find good leaders and vote for good people to rise to positions of rulership.
Yeah, I guess for the time being, the situation is quite hopeless in India. Anyways, Jayant, thank you for coming on the Labyrinth. This was, as always, a very insightful conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity, Pratham.